I want you to imagine just for a second a very specific kind of travel scenario. So you book a flight to go visit a sovereign nation in Europe, right?
Right. Pretty standard.
Yeah, completely standard. You pack your bags, you get on the plane, you fly for hours, and then you finally land. You grab your luggage off the carousel, you walk out the front doors of the terminal, and you realize something fundamental is just totally wrong.
You're not actually where you thought you were.
Exactly. You are not in the country you booked your ticket to see. In fact, to get to your actual destination, you have to go rent a car, drive across an international border, and navigate your way deep into this steep, frankly treacherous mountain canyon. And only then do you actually arrive.
Yeah, it's the ultimate geographic barrier to entry. I mean, you're describing a level of physical isolation that just completely shatters all of our modern expectations of, what an independent country is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to function, really.
Yeah, totally. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. You are listening to The Topic Lens. Today is Sunday, March 22, 2026.
Always good to establish where we are in time.
Exactly. So just yesterday, we were exploring the southern United States, specifically the state of Alabama. And we did that really to help you, especially if you're tuning in from Europe, to understand the deep nuances of American regionalism.
Right, because America isn't just one monolith.
Exactly. It's huge. But today, we are taking the journey over the pond. We are heading straight into the Pyrenees Mountains to give you a reciprocal look at European culture.
A little cultural exchange.
You got it.
Huh.
We are diving into a European microstate called Andorra. And, well, I'll be honest, even a lot of Europeans struggle to pinpoint this place on a map.
Oh, absolutely. Which is, exactly why it's such a fascinating subject for our analysis today.
It really is. And this brings us to, our core mission for this deep dive, because this is not going to be some romantic travelogue, right?
No tourist brochures here.
Exactly. We are not here to paint a glossy postcard of snow-capped peaks and, charming little ski chalets. Our goal is to give you a definitive guide to understanding where these people actually come from and why they do the things they do.
Because the why is always the most interesting part.
Totally. Because just as, say, a corporate lawyer in New York City differs wildly from an automotive factory worker in Michigan, European cultures are, well, they're intensely distinct.
Oh, massively.
There is a huge difference between a Dane and a Portuguese citizen. So to really understand this place, we are going to unpack Andorra's truly bizarre political system. We're going to examine its borderline copyright infringement of a national flag.
That is one of my favorite parts, honestly.
It's so funny. And we're also going to relive its 2017 Miracle on Ice moment, which, in true European fashion, actually happened on a football pitch against Hungary, of all teams.
It's an incredible story.
It really is. Now, we always try to highlight stars or specific figures you might have heard of in these deep dives, but Andorra has, very few people.
Barely enough to fill a small stadium, really.
Right. Which forces us to look at the society itself as the main character today.
And honestly, Andorra is the perfect case study for you to understand how extreme geography shapes historical destiny. It's basically a masterclass in how a tiny, seemingly vulnerable nation can survive for centuries, and not through military might, but by mastering the incredibly delicate art of, balancing giants.
Balancing giants. I love that phrasing. And I actually want to start by tackling this geographic paradox head on because it sets the stage for literally everything else we're going to talk about.
It's the foundation of everything Andorran.
Yeah, 100%. So when we say Andorra is small, we really need to establish the exact scale for you. The entire country, the whole thing, is about 468 square kilometers.
That is exactly 181 square miles for our American listener.
Thank you. Yes, 181 square miles. To put that into a tangible perspective so you can actually picture it, it is almost exactly the physical size of the city of San Jose, California.
Wow, just one city.
Yep. It's slightly smaller than the city limits of Chicago, and it's actually smaller than Columbus, Ohio.
But, context is everything here. Because in the highly specific category of European microstates, Andorra is actually considered a giant.
Really, a giant.
Oh, yeah. For comparison, it is roughly 230 times larger than the Principality of Monaco.
Oh, wow. Okay, so compared to Monaco, it's massive.
Huge. But the square mileage is almost a deceptive metric, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is, because you can't actually use most of that land. If you look at a map of, say, Chicago or San Jose, you see these sprawling grids, flat suburbs, endless development potential everywhere.
Flat land as far as the eye can see.
Exactly. Andorra has absolutely none of that. It is completely landlocked. It has no coastline. It has no domestic train network. And like I mentioned in the intro, it has 0 airports within its own borders.
Yeah, that's the landing in another country part.
Right. If you want to fly there, you have to use the Andorra-La-Seu d'Urgell airport, which is physically located south of the border in neighboring Spain.
And then you drive.
And then you drive.
Yeah.
Because the entire nation is locked within these jagged, incredibly steep valleys of the Eastern Pyrenees Mountains, just wedged directly between France to the north and Spain to the south.
And the topographical reality of that is just there's virtually no flat land available for traditional urban expansion.
None at all.
Right. So when you're constrained by steep mountain walls on all sides, your urban development is forced entirely into the vertical plane. You have to build up. The capital city, which is appropriately named Andorra la Vella, sits at 1,023 meters above sea level.
Which is pretty high up.
Oh, it is. That elevation actually makes it the highest capital city anywhere in Europe.
Now, I know anyone listening to us from Colorado is probably rolling their eyes right now because, Denver sits at 1,609 meters.
Right, the mile-high city.
Yeah, exactly. But in the context of European capitals, 1,000 meters up in a narrow, freezing mountain pass is extreme. And because those valleys are just so incredibly tight, the capital city has actually physically merged with the neighboring municipality of Escaldes and Gordon.
They just ran out of room.
Totally. They've fused together to create this single, continuous urban canyon. Roughly half of the entire country's population lives crammed into this one narrow strip of development.
And honestly, we need to dissect that population number carefully because it's fascinating. We're looking at a total national population of roughly 85,000 to 89,000 people.
Which is tiny.
It's tiny. To give you a mental anchor, that's roughly the population of Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Yeah.
But the total head count masks the absolute most critical demographic twist of the entire Andorran state.
Oh, yeah, this blew my mind.
Right. Out of those 85,000 residents, only about 45 to 48% actually hold Andorran citizenship.
I literally had to read that statistic 3 times when we were researching this deep dive. I want you to really absorb what that means as a listener. The absolute majority of people living inside the borders of this country are legally not from there.
They are foreign nationals.
Yeah. You have this demographic pie chart where about 25% of the residents are Spanish nationals, specifically pulling really heavily from the neighboring Catalan region.
Makes sense, given the geography.
Right. And then another 15% are Portuguese immigrants, and about 5% are French. And getting citizenship, it is not a simple administrative process.
Understatement of the year.
Seriously, you don't just move there, work for 5 years, take a little basic civics test, swear an oath, and you're in. No. Andorra demands 20 years of continuous legal residency before you are even allowed to apply for naturalization.
20 years. It is genuinely one of the most stringent naturalization policies on the planet today.
It feels like an incredibly exclusive, maybe even somewhat elitist country club. You can work the grounds, you can pay your monthly dues, you can eat in the dining room every single day for 2 straight decades before the board of directors even entertains the idea of giving you a voting membership.
That is a perfect analogy.
But I have to push back on this system. How is that functionally democratic? You have an entire society where the majority of the working class people, the ones pouring the coffee, building the houses, running the ski lifts, they have 0 political voice.
Yeah, it's a completely fair question. And from a purely modern liberal democratic standpoint, it is highly problematic.
Yeah.
It creates an undeniable democratic deficit.
Huge deficit.
But if you want to understand why they do this, you have to look at it strictly through the lens of Andorran survival.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, this strict citizenship law is not merely some bureaucratic hurdle designed to be cruel to immigrants. It is a profound, deeply entrenched defensive mechanism.
A defense against what, exactly?
Against disappearing. For centuries, their mountainous geography forced them into total isolation. And that isolation bred this intense survivalist mentality. Today, they don't need to survive harsh winters or invading feudal armies. They need to survive demographic dilution.
Oh, I see.
Right. The laws are specifically engineered to protect the indigenous Catalan culture and the local political power from being completely swallowed up by the massive and, frankly, necessary influx of foreign workers who arrived to operate the modern tourism and service economy.
So it completely flips the traditional American concept of the melting pot entirely on its head.
Exactly. It's the inverse.
Because in the United States, the whole foundational narrative is about arriving, assimilating, and immediately becoming part of the new national fabric. But in Andorra, the institutional narrative is about arriving and remaining a distinct, separate guest for an entire generation.
Yeah, generation at least. Think about it. If they allowed a standard, say, 5-year path to citizenship, like most countries, the native Andorrans would literally be outvoted in their own parliamentary elections within a single election cycle.
Wow. Yeah, the math checks out on that.
The Spanish and Portuguese diaspora would instantly hold the majority of the political power.
Yeah.
The Andorran identity would just cease to dictate Andorran policy.
That is wild.
So, they have constructed a society that is effectively a nation of guests. The economy is completely reliant on this foreign workforce, yet the political sovereignty remains incredibly tightly restricted to a minority of generational natives.
It's a system entirely built on preserving a very specific institutional continuity at all costs. And honestly, if you think their citizenship laws are rigid and unusual, you have to look at the political framework that those actual citizens are voting for.
Oh, the political system is arguably even weirder than the citizenship laws.
It really is. Let's trace how this extreme geography naturally led to a political system that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a medieval fantasy novel. So, Andorra operates as a parliamentary co-principality.
The co-principality.
Right. They have two heads of state known as co-princes. But here is the part that breaks every rule of modern governance. Neither of these heads of state is actually chosen by the Andorran people.
Yep.
And neither of them even lives in Andorra.
It is an absolutely remarkable geopolitical artifact. It's almost a miracle it has survived into the 21st century.
So how did this happen?
To understand it, we have to go way back, like back to the year 1278.
1278. Okay, we're going deep into the history books.
Deep dive, right. So back then, the region was being torn apart by a really violent, bloody feud over who controlled the territory. On one side, you had the Catholic Bishop of Urgell, whose seat of power was located in Spain.
Okay, bishop in Spain.
Right. And on the other side, you had the Count of Foix, who was a powerful noble based in France. So to stop the constant warfare, they finally signed a peace treaty known as the Pariage.
The Pariage.
Yes. And this treaty essentially declared a tie. They just agreed to co-rule the territory, splitting the sovereignty directly down the middle.
Just a 50-50 split of a country to stop fighting.
Exactly.
And the crazy thing is that split sovereignty just kept rolling forward through history, just absorbing all the bizarre political changes of the neighboring countries over the centuries.
It just adapted to whatever was happening outside the valley?
Right. So the Spanish side of the equation stayed relatively stable. To this very day, the current Catholic Bishop of Urgell is one of the co-princes.
Continuity on the Spanish side.
But the French side, that is where the sheer absurdity of history kicks in. The title passed from the Counts of Foix over to the Kings of Navarre, and then it was eventually absorbed into the French monarchy.
The kings of France were the co-princes.
Yep. But then the French Revolution happened, and they executed their kings. So you would think the title would just vanish, right?
I mean, you'd assume it would die with the monarchy.
But no.
Yeah.
Eventually, it just transferred to the democratically elected presidents of the French Republic, which brings us today to Emmanuel Macron.
The Macron factor. It is truly unique in global geopolitics. I mean, Emmanuel Macron is the only person in the entire world who serves as the head of state for two entirely separate sovereign nations simultaneously.
Which is crazy enough on its own.
Right. Yet, he is only elected by the citizens of one of them. The Andorrans do not vote for Macron.
I am genuinely trying to wrap my head around the daily reality of this. So Emmanuel Macron is literally a prince of a tiny mountain nation that he probably rarely, if ever, thinks about during his day-to-day duties running France.
He's a bit busy with Paris, yeah.
Exactly. I have to ask, is this just a symbolic gimmick for the tourists? Like, does the Bishop of Urgell and the President of France actually hold functional power over the daily lives of people living in Andorra la Vella?
That's the logical question.
If I am an Andorran citizen, how do I feel about a French president? I didn't even vote for having constitutional authority over my own country.
Well, the Andorran citizens generally accept it, and here's why. Because the co-princes serve as the ultimate guarantors of their independence.
Okay, so they're like the big bouncers at the door.
That's a great way to look at it. And while their roles have become largely ceremonial since the modern Constitution was adopted, they are absolutely not mere gimmicks. They retain real constitutional powers.
Give me an example.
Well, for example, laws passed by the Andorran Parliament, which is known as the General Council, traditionally require the signature of the co-princes to actually be enacted. They even have personal representatives permanently stationed in Andorra to monitor the government.
Like ambassadors, but with veto power.
Kind of, yeah.
And their influence creates very real, tangible boundaries on modern Andorran politics, right? Like, let's take the influence of the Bishop of Urgell, because one of your heads of state is literally a high-ranking official in the Catholic Church. Traditional Catholic values are deeply embedded into the very framework of the state.
Precisely. You can't separate the church from the state when the church is the state.
Wow, yeah.
The most prominent example of this today is reproductive rights. Abortion remains completely and totally banned in Andorra under all circumstances.
All circumstances.
All of them. There are no exceptions for health, no exceptions for fetal anomaly or assault.
That is intense.
It is. And the political reality of the situation is that if the Andorran Parliament were to pass a law legalizing abortion tomorrow, the Bishop of Urgell would likely refuse to sign it.
Which would cause a mess.
A massive mess.
Right.
It would precipitate a massive constitutional crisis and potentially the collapse of the entire co-principality system itself.
And just to be very clear to you, the listener, we are strictly reporting the mechanics of their domestic legal framework here.
Right, just laying out the facts.
We are not taking a side on their internal debates regarding modernization versus tradition, but it perfectly illustrates how a peace treaty signed in 1278 directly dictates medical policy in 2026.
History casting a very long shadow.
Exactly. The political divide in Andorra does not look like the traditional left-wing versus right-wing battles we see in America or the rest of Europe.
No, it's a totally different spectrum.
Their political tension is constantly organized around these big existential questions. Do we integrate more closely with the European Union, or do we fiercely protect our historical sovereignty? Do we secularize and modernize our laws, or do we maintain the traditional Catholic framework that keeps the bishop engaged as our protector?
And, that reliance on external protectors is exactly what has kept them off the map in a very literal sense. Because they were so small, so isolated, and legally beholden to this bizarre dual monarchy system, the rest of the world frequently just forgot they existed.
Which leads to my absolute favorite historical anecdote about Andorra. I mean, it perfectly encapsulates their bizarre place in the world.
It's so good.
So when World War I broke out in 1914, Andorra, acting out of solidarity with its French co-prince, officially declared war on the German Empire.
They stepped up?
They did. Now, they didn't have a massive army. They had like a small militia of local men with hunting rifles, but legally speaking, they were a combatant nation.
Fully in the war.
Right. Yet, when the war ended and all the victorious powers gathered to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1918, the diplomats simply forgot to invite the Andorran delegation.
They just slipped off the guest list.
They completely forgot about them. The map makers and the politicians were so incredibly focused on carving up empires that they completely overlooked the tiny valley in the Pyrenees.
Which had real legal consequences.
Massive ones. Because purely due to an administrative oversight at a peace conference, Andorra was technically not included in the armistice. Meaning they remained in a legal state of war with Germany for decades.
For decades, yes.
It wasn't until 1939, right before the outbreak of the Second World War, that Andorra and Germany finally signed a bilateral peace treaty to officially end their specific conflict from the First World War.
I mean, it sounds comical, right? Like a sketch comedy premise.
It totally does.
But it actually reveals the genius of the 1278 Peerage Treaty. It was a brilliantly effective, albeit entirely unintentional, long-term survival strategy. Well, by splitting the ownership and sovereignty of the territory directly between two rival giants, Spain and France, the architects of that medieval treaty ensured that neither giant could ever unilaterally annex Andorra.
Mutually assured destruction almost.
Exactly. If France tried to march an army in and take it, Spain would see it as a direct act of war against them, and vice versa. The tension between the bishop and the count, and later the president and the bishop, created this impenetrable protective bubble.
So they survived for over 700 years, not by investing in a strong military, but by mastering the diplomatic art of remaining perfectly, immovably balanced between two competing geopolitical
The
predators.
ultimate balancing act.
I mean, they didn't even get a modern written constitution until 1993.
1993, think about that.
But that's the exact same year they finally joined the United Nations. They basically went from operating under a medieval feudal agreement to functioning as a modern parliamentary democracy almost overnight.
And that transition was only possible because they formalized that exact balance. The concept of balanced dependency is just so fundamental to their psychology that it dictates every single national symbol they have.
Oh, which is the perfect bridge to discuss their flag. Because the extreme isolation and the bizarre political system we just unpacked, they are literally stitched into the visual fabric of their national identity.
It's all right there on the flag.
Yet, the Andorran flag is not just a piece of cloth. It is essentially a legally binding diplomatic contract in textile form.
Visual diplomacy is exactly the right term for it.
Okay, let's break it down.
Sure. So the current design of the flag was adopted in 1866. Historical legend actually suggests it was heavily influenced by the French Emperor Napoleon III. It consists of 3 vertical stripes, blue on the left, yellow in the middle, and red on the right.
Now, I want you to pull up a picture of this flag on your phone right now if you can, because if you look at it and then you look at the national flags of Romania, the African nation of Chad, and Moldova, you will notice an incredible similarity.
They are nearly identical.
They really are. They all use the exact same vertical blue, yellow, and red stripes. It looks like a blatant case of international copyright infringement.
It does, but there's a reason.
Right. The only subtle physical differentiator is that the middle yellow stripe on the Andorran flag is slightly wider than the blue and red stripes.
A tiny detail.
Yeah. But more importantly, the Andorran flag features their national coat of arms stamped squarely in the center of that yellow stripe. But the choice of those specific colors is definitely not a coincidence, is it? It is a highly intentional message.
Absolutely. The colors are a direct visual political statement acknowledging those dual protectors we were just talking about.
Right, France and Spain.
Exactly. The blue and the red stripes are pulled directly from the French tricolor flag, and the yellow and the red stripes are pulled from the traditional colors of Spain, and more specifically from the Senyera, which is the regional flag of Catalonia.
So they just smash them together.
Literally. By weaving these specific colors together, Andorra is visually stating to the whole world that their very existence is entirely dependent on maintaining the harmony and balance between the French Republic and the Spanish state.
It is brilliant. It is seriously like cutting out pieces of a ransom note from the magazines of your powerful neighbors, but instead of demanding money, you are demanding to just be left alone.
I love that comparison.
And then you zoom in on that coat of arms right in the center. I look at it and I see a corporate merger logo where every single historical stakeholder threw a fit and demanded that their specific branding be included in the final design.
Everyone wanted a piece of the pie.
It is divided into 4 distinct quadrants, and each quadrant tells a piece of that geopolitical survival story.
Let's break down those quadrants because they are a literal map of their political history.
Walk me through it.
In the top left quadrant, you see a golden bishop's mitre, which is that traditional tall hat crossed with a golden crozier, the shepherd's staff. This explicitly represents the Bishop of Urgel in Spain.
Okay, that's co-prince number 1.
Right. Then in the top right quadrant, you have 3 vertical red stripes on a gold background. This represents the historical French Counts of Foix.
So the entire top half of the shield is just the original 1278 Paris Treaty, the bishop and the count.
Exactly. They get the top billing. Then you move to the bottom half. In the bottom left, there are 4 red vertical stripes on a gold background. This is the classic ancient symbol of Catalonia,
Acknowledging the culture.
acknowledging their deep cultural and linguistic ties to the Spanish region just to their south. And finally, in the bottom right quadrant, there are 2 red cows with blue horns and bells.
Cows.
Yes, cows. These represent the historical French region of Béarn, which also held sway over the territory at various points in history.
Okay, so literally every single regional power that ever marched an army past their borders or held a claim over their valley gets a square on the shield.
Nobody was left out.
They left nobody out, guaranteeing that nobody could ever claim they were being disrespected. And then beneath those 4 quadrants sits the national motto, Virtus Unita Fortior, which translates from Latin to united virtue is stronger, or sometimes it's translated as united strength is stronger.
And The contrast between that motto and the foundational mottos of larger nations is profoundly revealing.
Right, let's compare it to the American context to really understand the psychology here. In the United States, the traditional motto is e pluribus unum, which means out of many, one.
The melting pot again.
Yeah, the entire American narrative is a story of assimilation. It is the idea that many different states, many different immigrant cultures, and many different backgrounds melt together, abandon their prior divisions, and forge a single, newly unified American identity.
But Andorra's motto is the exact antithesis of that concept.
Oh,
Virtus unita fortior is not about assimilating into a new homogenized identity. It is a pragmatic, open acknowledgement of their dependency. Their motto, paired with their flag, signifies that their strength comes explicitly from remaining united with their historical external protectors.
I see.
It is an admission that they are too small to survive alone. They don't want independence from France and Spain. They absolutely require the continuous balanced engagement of France and Spain to validate their very borders.
It's fascinating. When Andorra modernized its laws and finally adopted a written constitution in 1993, they didn't throw out the old symbols.
No, they doubled down on them.
They didn't design a sleek new modern flag to represent their new democratic era. They legally mandated the continued use of this medieval coat of arms in these specific colors.
Which tells you a lot about them.
It illustrates a core philosophy of the Andorran people. True modernity and security are achieved through rigorous continuity, not through revolution or breaking ties with the past.
And that transition from medieval continuity into modern reality brings us directly to the most dramatic transformation in Andorran history.
The economy.
Yes, their economy.
Yeah.
Because while their political system remained pretty much frozen in time, their economic reality experienced a whiplash-inducing evolution.
Let's follow that causal chain.
Yeah.
The extreme geography isolated them politically, which protected them from wars, but it also completely starved them economically.
They were very, very poor.
Historically, this was a terribly poor society. For centuries, the local economy was essentially a subsistence model based on herding sheep and goats up and down the rocky slopes.
Not exactly a huge cash cow.
No. I mean, there was a tiny bit of agriculture in the narrow valleys, specifically a focus on tobacco farming, but you just cannot build massive wealth when you have almost zero arable land.
You are entirely constrained by the topography. They had some small-scale ironworks known as fargs, but they lacked the transportation infrastructure to export heavy goods efficiently. No trains, remember.
Yep.
So they remained largely impoverished and cut off from the massive industrial revolutions sweeping through France and the rest of Europe.
But then geography, which had been their economic prison for centuries, suddenly became their absolute greatest economic asset.
The turning point.
During the 20th century, specifically during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s and then throughout the First and Second World Wars, Andorra discovered a highly lucrative niche. Because they were strictly neutral, heavily isolated, and completely outside the standard European tax and tariff systems, the entire country morphed into a smuggler's paradise.
The black market basically became their primary economic engine.
Which is wild to think about.
But it makes sense. When you have strict rationing and high tariffs in France and Spain, a neutral, tax-free zone situated directly on the border becomes immensely valuable.
I want you to picture the reality of this. We are not talking about modern digital smuggling or hiding money in an app. We are talking about local Andorran men strapping 80-pound backpacks full of raw tobacco, roasted coffee beans, and even consumer electronics like radios to their backs.
Heavy physical labor.
And they would hike over these treacherous, freezing mountain passes in the dead of night just to bypass the Spanish and French border guards.
It was incredibly dangerous.
Extremely. But the profit margins were astronomical compared to herding sheep. And remarkably, they are deeply proud of this heritage today.
They don't hide it at all.
Not at all. If you walk through the middle of the capital city today, you will literally see functioning tobacco fields sitting right next to modern glass banking towers and luxury watch boutiques. It is a deliberate visual nod to the crop that kept them alive.
It's an amazing juxtaposition. And the transition from being a rugged smuggling hub to becoming a modern, legitimate economic powerhouse was driven by a brilliant realization.
What was that?
They realized they could formalize and commercialize their lack of taxes. They shifted from sneaking goods across the border in the dark to inviting the consumers across the border in the broad daylight.
Oh, that's smart.
Today, this tiny mountain enclave receives between 8 and 10 million tourists every single year.
I need you to just pause and process that mathematical ratio for a second. We are talking about a resident population of 85,000 people attempting to manage an influx of 10 million visitors annually.
It's mind-boggling.
If you scale that ratio up to match the population of the United States, it would be the equivalent of 3.5 billion tourists flooding into America every single year. It is a staggering, almost incomprehensible volume of humanity moving through a single, narrow mountain valley.
And these millions of tourists are primarily drawn by two specific, highly developed industries.
The first one is retail, right?
Yes, retail. The Avinguda Maritzel, which is the main commercial street in the capital, is essentially a massive duty-free shopping mall. It offers electronics, luxury goods, and alcohol at significantly lower prices than the surrounding countries.
A shopper's paradise. And the second industry is winter sports. But these are not the quaint, quiet little ski villages you picture when you think of the Alps. Andorra has built massive, American-style consolidated ski resorts, most notably Grand Valira.
Grand Valira is a perfect manifestation of their modernization strategy.
So?
Well, they realized they could not compete by having a dozen fractured, poorly funded local ski hills. So they just linked the valleys together to create one of the largest ski domains in Europe. They focus purely on high-volume throughput and highly professionalized premium service infrastructure.
But retail and ski lifts are only the visible half of the economy. The real engine, the quiet, massive generator of wealth throughout the late 20th century, was Andorra's status as a highly secretive offshore tax haven.
Ah, yes, the banking sector.
They levied no income tax whatsoever, and they maintained incredibly strict banking secrecy laws that prevented foreign governments from seeing who was storing money in Andorran vaults.
Which was very popular with certain demographics.
Very. Which brings us to the most significant economic turning point in modern Andorran history. Andorra was operating comfortably as a classic opaque tax haven until the year 2015.
The year everything changed.
And the catalyst that forced them to abandon this model did not come from the European Union in Brussels. It came from Washington, D.C.
This is where the story gets incredibly intense.
It feels like a spy thriller. The United States Treasury Department houses an agency called the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, better known as FinCEN. In March 2015, FinCEN invoked Section 311 of the USA Patriot Act and declared one of Andorra's largest financial institutions, Banca Privada de Andorra, or BPA, to be a primary money laundering concern.
A huge accusation.
Massive. FinCEN publicly accused the bank's senior management of facilitating massive money laundering operations for transnational criminal organizations, including Russian syndicates and Venezuelan officials.
The mechanical impact of that specific designation is devastating to a bank. We really have to explain how this actually works.
Right, because how does a bureaucrat in Washington destroy a bank sitting in the Pyrenees?
It is all about the global dollar system. By designating BPA as a primary money laundering concern, FinCEN essentially orders every single American financial institution to immediately sever all correspondent banking relationships with the target bank.
And why is that fatal?
Because in the modern global economy, if a bank cannot clear transactions in US dollars, it literally cannot function internationally. The moment that notice was published, BPA was instantly cut off from the global financial nervous system.
Just unplugged.
The bank collapsed almost overnight. The Andorran government had to step in immediately, freeze accounts, and dismantle the institution just to prevent a total systemic run on the rest of the country's banking sector.
It is the ultimate flex of geopolitical financial power. The IRS and the U.S. Treasury literally reached across the Atlantic Ocean, bypassed the mountains, bypassed the French and Spanish borders, and turned the lights out on an Andorran bank with a single administrative letter.
That event sent absolute shockwaves through the entire Andorran establishment. It was a brutal, undeniable wake-up call.
Showing them who's really in charge.
It demonstrated the absolute, inescapable reach of American financial hegemony. They realized that even a neutral microstate hidden in the mountains cannot hide from the regulatory power of the global US dollar system.
There's nowhere to hide anymore.
Exactly. The old model of absolute banking secrecy was fundamentally incompatible with a transparent, integrated global economy.
So they were forced to adapt immediately. Consequently, Andorra introduced a national income tax for the very first time in its entire history.
A historic shift.
It is capped at a maximum of 10%, which is still incredibly low by European standards, but the precedent was definitively set. They began rapidly signing tax transparency agreements and aligning their banking practices with international standards just to avoid being blacklisted again.
And this rapid integration into standard European financial practices highlights a really fascinating economic paradox.
Whoa, the currency.
Right. Despite aligning their taxes and banking laws with European standards, and despite relying entirely on European tourists, Andorra is not a member state of the European Union.
Which makes their currency situation totally bizarre. Because if you travel to Andorra today, you pay for your duty-free electronics and your ski passes using the euro. How do they use the euro without being in the EU?
It is a purely pragmatic arrangement born out of necessity.
Walk me through it.
Historically, before the euro existed, Andorra simply used the French franc and the Spanish peseta simultaneously, just whatever was in your pocket.
Nice and easy.
But when France and Spain both adopted the euro, Andorra had no choice but to follow suit. Their entire economy would have collapsed if they had tried to invent their own isolated currency. So for years, they used the euro unofficially.
Just treating it like cash.
Yeah. But finally, in 2011, they negotiated a formal monetary agreement with the European Union. This agreement allows them to legally use the euro as their official currency, and they are even permitted to mint a small quantity of their own Andorran-designed euro coins.
Okay, so they're in the club.
Sort of. However, they have absolutely no representation in the European Central Bank and zero voting power regarding European monetary policy.
It is incredibly similar to the situation with Puerto Rico in the United States. I mean, Puerto Rico uses the U.S. dollar and is subject to the economic tides dictated by the Federal Reserve, but it's not a state and has no voting representation in the U.S. Congress.
That's a great parallel.
It is a pragmatic surrender of monetary sovereignty to accommodate geographical and economic reality.
And if we synthesize this entire economic journey, the broader picture of American soft power is quite striking, isn't it?
Very striking. The United States has not sent a massive wave of immigrants to Andorra. There is no historical American diaspora living in the Pyrenees dictating local politics. However, American concepts have entirely reshaped their reality.
Culturally and economically.
Right. The adoption of American consumerism, like the massive retail mall experience, the consolidated mega resort business model, coupled with the devastating regulatory reach of American financial law, successfully forced Andorra to transition.
They had to grow up, in a way.
They moved from a medieval, survivalist agricultural economy into a hyper-specialized, highly regulated, high-value per square meter modern service economy.
Which brings up the most compelling question of all. Who are these people, actually?
Yes. We've unpacked their extreme geography, their bizarre medieval politics, and their forced economic modernization. But let's dive into the culture, the identity, and the hidden gems of Andorran society.
The human element.
Because the stereotypes surrounding Andorra in Europe are incredibly strong and, well, quite dismissive.
Very dismissive.
If you ask a typical European living in Paris or Madrid, they generally view Andorra as a giant, tax-free outdoor shopping mall run by a bunch of rich mountain hermits.
But stereotypes usually rely on a tiny grain of truth while completely missing the depth of the sociological reality.
Exactly.
It is factually true that the economy relies heavily on retail tourism and low taxation. It is also true that many wealthy individuals relocate there explicitly for financial reasons.
But that's not the whole story.
Not at all. The everyday reality for the native citizens is vastly different. The cultural core of Andorra is a hardworking population that is fiercely, almost desperately dedicated to preserving its unique cultural identity against this overwhelming daily tide of 10 million tourists and tens of thousands of foreign workers.
And the absolute anchor of that cultural core is their language. The native Andorrans are definitively Catalan in their cultural heritage.
A very distinct linguistic group.
This is the only sovereign country in the entire world where the Catalan language is the sole exclusive official language of the state.
That linguistic distinction is absolutely critical to understanding their mindset.
They feel a deep, unbreakable cultural kinship with the Catalonia region of Spain, which sits just south of their border. They watch Catalan television networks. They share the exact same historical mythology and traditions, but they remain fiercely, politically separate from the Spanish state.
It is a fascinating dynamic to observe. And maintaining Catalan as the sole official language is not just a matter of pride. It is a deliberate, highly enforced government policy.
Like a defense mechanism.
Exactly. When you have a massive resident population of Spanish, Portuguese, and French nationals,
Mm.
the natural tendency is for the dominant language of the immigrants, usually Spanish, to overtake the local tongue.
Right, just sheer numbers.
So, by legally mandating Catalan in all government functions, in the school systems, and in official business communications, the Andorran government forces the foreign workers to integrate into the host culture.
Wow.
It is a daily structural assertion of their sovereignty. It ensures that the host culture is not diluted by the overwhelming mass of its neighbors.
And speaking of those foreign residents, we really have to talk about the celebrities.
The famous expats.
Because if you look at who actually holds residency in Andorra, you are not going to find any native Andorran Hollywood A-listers. There is no Andorran equivalent of a Tom Cruise or a Beyoncé dominating global pop culture.
Not quite, though.
However, the country has engineered itself into an absolute haven for a very specific, highly lucrative type of modern expatriate.
You are referring to the influx of elite athletes and digital content creators.
Exactly. World-class MotoGP motorcycle riders like the multi-time world champion Marc Marquez, and dozens of elite professional cyclists live there.
A lot of athletes.
Ostensibly, they moved to Andorra for the high-altitude physical training, which is, great for cardio.
Sure, cardio.
But let's be totally honest with each other. They are primarily moving there to take advantage of the highly favorable 10% maximum tax rate.
The financial altitude is much better there.
Good one. But recently, it has gone far beyond traditional athletes. Over the last decade, Andorra has attracted a massive wave of the biggest Spanish YouTubers, Twitch streamers, and digital influencers.
A huge migration.
Massive internet personalities like El Rubius have famously moved their entire operations from Spain across the border into Andorra explicitly to escape the high Spanish income tax brackets.
And this migration creates a fascinating and highly polarizing public relations dynamic. Well, for the Spanish government tax authorities and a large portion of the Spanish general public, these young, wealthy influencers are viewed as tax villains.
Whoa, big time.
They are seen as unpatriotic citizens abandoning the country that educated them, hoarding their digital wealth in a mountain fortress while avoiding contributing to the public infrastructure of Spain.
But inside Andorra, the perspective is completely flipped, isn't it?
Totally. Within Andorra, these influencers and digital nomads are welcomed as the vanguard of a new, clean digital economy.
They're the future.
Right.
Huh.
Andorra cannot build massive automotive factories. They do not have the land or the logistics. But they do have 100% fiber optic internet coverage across the entire country, and they have incredibly low crime rates.
Perfect for streamers.
Exactly. They are actively trying to position themselves as a premier hub for tech startups and digital entrepreneurs.
But I have to challenge this model from a sociological perspective.
Go for it.
I look at this and I wonder, how do you build genuine unifying national pride? If your biggest cultural exports to the outside world are essentially digital nomads and motorcycle racers who are quite literally hiding from the Spanish taxman, where does the actual soul of the country reside?
It's a tough question.
Right. If I am a local Andorran whose family has lived in the valley for 500 years, do I feel a sense of national kinship with a 22-year-old YouTuber who lives in a gated compound and complains about Spanish taxes?
You are hitting on a vital question about the fundamental nature of national pride.
Tell me.
For larger nations, pride is often built on cultural exportation. America takes pride in Hollywood and its global musical influence. France takes pride in its culinary and philosophical exports.
Right, soft power.
But Andorran pride is not built on global cultural projection. They're not trying to conquer the world with their cinema or their pop music. Their pride is entirely internal.
What do you mean by internal?
It is built on the concept of institutional endurance. The soul of the Andorran identity rests in a quiet, undeniable knowledge. They look at history and say, we navigated between aggressive, warring empires for over 700 years. We survived the feudal eras, we survived the world wars, we survived the economic shifts.
They outlasted everyone.
Exactly. Countless other European microstates and duchies were violently absorbed, conquered, or destroyed over the centuries, but we are still here. Their profound national pride is survival itself.
I understand that deep, quiet pride and endurance. I really do. But sometimes survival is just not enough.
Sometimes you need a win.
Sometimes you need a megaphone. Sometimes you need a visceral, undeniable moment on the global stage to prove to everyone else that you truly exist and that you are capable of greatness.
And for Andorra, like so many other nations, that explosive validation comes through the medium of sports.
Yes. Let's talk about their miracle on ice moment, which, because this is Europe, obviously happened on a football pitch. But before we get to the football miracle, we should briefly touch on their basketball prowess because it is legitimately impressive and sets the stage for how they view competition.
Yes, their achievement in professional basketball is incredibly significant. The local professional team is BC Andorra, currently known commercially as Mora Bank Andorra.
And they compete in Spain's Liga ACB.
Right? And for you listening, if you do not follow international basketball, you need to know that the Spanish Liga ACB is universally considered the second-best domestic basketball league in the entire world, sitting directly behind the NBA.
Elite.
Very elite. And BC Andorra is not just quietly participating in this league, they are actively competing at a high level. Because they are the only professional team of note in the country, they function essentially as the entire nation's team.
I love that. When they play a home game, the entire country rallies behind them. You have this tiny club taking the court and regularly battling and sometimes defeating massive globally funded teams from giant Spanish cities like Real Madrid and FC Barcelona.
It is the ultimate David versus Goliath scenario, playing out on the hardwood every single weekend.
And you see a very similar dynamic beginning to unfold in club football, too. FC Andorra, the local club team, was actually purchased by the legendary Spanish football superstar Gerard Piqué in 2018.
Piqué's involvement is a perfect modern example of how foreign capital and influence blend with local institutions.
What did he do?
He infused the club with significant cash, completely overhauled their professional management structure, and successfully dragged them from the deep regional amateur leagues all the way up to the Segunda Division.
Which is huge.
It's just one single step below the top-tier Spanish football, La Liga.
But while club success is thrilling and brings great entertainment to the valleys, club teams rely heavily on foreign players and imported talent. Nothing unites a country's soul quite like the national team, where the players actually must be citizens.
And the saga of the Andorran national football team provides the absolute crown jewel of our deep dive today.
Yes. Let's set the scene for this, because if you pitched this story to a Hollywood studio, they would reject it for being too unbelievably cliché.
It truly is an extraordinary narrative. The Andorran national football team was globally legendary, but unfortunately they were legendary for their sheer ineptitude.
They were famously bad.
Famously. Going into the summer of 2017, they had gone 66 consecutive competitive matches without a single victory.
I want to emphasize that number for a second. 66 matches. That equates to 13 solid years of doing nothing but losing and occasionally drawing on the international stage. Every single time they stepped onto the pitch, they expected to be crushed.
Which is entirely logical when you look at the demographics.
Sure.
When your national team manager is trying to draw an elite squad from a total citizen pool of barely 40,000 people, and you are forced to play against nations that have millions of citizens and massive multi-million euro developmental academies, simply fielding 11 competent players is a monumental challenge.
Entering this specific match, Andorra was ranked 186th in the world by FIFA.
Near the very bottom.
Then we arrive at June 9th, 2017. It is a qualifying match for the FIFA World Cup. The match is being played in Andorra la Vella at the Estadi Nacional, which holds just over 3,000 people.
A tiny venue.
It's a tiny venue surrounded by massive mountain peaks. Andorra is playing against the national team of Hungary. Now, Hungary is ranked 31st in the world. They are a respected, historic European footballing power. They have a national population of nearly 10 million people. They have professional players competing in top leagues across Europe.
A true footballing nation.
And the Andorran team is composed largely of guys who have actual day jobs. Electricians, office workers, postmen, guys who play football in their spare time.
Amateurs, basically.
And yet, against all conceivable logic, against every statistical probability, Andorra scores a goal. And then they defend like their lives depend on it. The final whistle blows. Andorra beats Hungary 1-0.
It was a tectonic shock in the European sports world.
I want you to really picture the scale of this upset. Imagine a town the exact size of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Imagine taking 11 guys from a local rec league in that town, flying them to Europe, and watching them physically defeat the all-star team of a nation of 10 million people in the most popular sport on Earth.
Unbelievable.
The scenes on the pitch were incredible. Grown men weeping, players collapsing on the turf in disbelief.
We have to synthesize why this matters so deeply beyond just the mechanics of the sport. Why does a football victory resonate so profoundly in this specific society?
Why do you think?
You have to look at their sociological reality. This is a microstate that is constantly overshadowed by its giant neighbors. It is a country that internally struggles with a massive non-citizen population, constantly questioning its own cultural cohesion.
All right, trying to hold on to their identity.
And it is a place that is frequently dismissively reduced to being just a cheap ski resort or a shady tax haven by the politicians in Paris and Madrid. When you live under that constant external dismissal, sports serve as the ultimate undeniable equalizer.
It is the one arena where the rules are exactly the same for everyone, regardless of your GDP or your square mileage.
Precisely. Beating a giant like Hungary on the international stage in a globally broadcast World Cup qualifier proves to the world that Andorra is a real, sovereign, capable nation. But more importantly, it proves it to themselves. It validates the endurance we spoke about earlier.
It is the ultimate validation of their existence, broadcast globally. So what does this all mean for us? Let's bring this journey to a close. We have covered an incredible amount of ground today.
We really have.
We've traveled from the steep, physically isolating valleys of the Pyrenees Mountains to the creation of a modern, duty-free banking hub. We have looked at a country that was totally forgotten by the diplomats in a World War I peace treaty, yet somehow transformed itself into a giant-slaying football nation.
Quite the arc.
We have unpacked how a bizarre, bloody 13th century treaty between a Spanish bishop and a French count somehow managed to evolve into a highly functioning, peaceful 21st century democracy.
This deep exploration of Andorra proves two seemingly contradictory things.
What's the first one?
First, it proves that geography is indeed destiny. The steep mountains completely dictated their historical isolation, their centuries of poverty, and eventually their modern wealth.
And the second thing?
Secondly, it proves that sheer physical size does not dictate survival. Institutional flexibility, extreme pragmatism regarding external powers, and a fierce, uncompromising dedication to preserving local identity can allow a tiny microstate to outlast massive global empires. Andorra forces us to fundamentally rethink what the concept of a country even is.
Exactly. I want you to think about how rapidly globalized our world is becoming today. We are currently witnessing the massive rise of digital nomads, remote work cultures, and borderless digital finance. The traditional concepts of borders and national identity are becoming incredibly blurred.
Which leads to a final, highly provocative question for you to consider.
Leave us with something to think about.
As traditional, massive nation-states struggle to adapt their bulky bureaucracies to this rapid globalization and digital fluidity, what if the future of governance looks less like the massive, sprawling empires of the past and more like Andorra?
Oh, interesting.
Consider the efficiency of a hyper-specialized, highly adaptable micro-community, a state that aggressively leverages the global economy for its economic survival, while simultaneously throwing up fierce legislative walls to protect its local soul and traditions.
That makes a lot of sense.
It makes you wonder, in the fast-paced, highly volatile 21st century, is it ultimately better to be the slow, lumbering giant or the nimble, hyper-aware survivor living quietly between the giant's toes?
A perfectly Andorran question to end on. If you ever find yourself looking at a map of global politics, remember that sometimes the most fascinating, complex stories are hiding in the smallest, murkiest mountain valleys. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive on the topic lens. We promise more fascinating unpackings next time.